Welcome. I'm Deb Willis, and I'm really happy to be here in conversation with Elizabeth, who has transformed this space, and I'm excited to be able to introduce you and some questions that I have for Elizabeth. But I think we'll start with one question. Could you share a bit about your background as a painter and what drew you into painting initially? And when did you start making paintings about women and specifically about the Black diaspora?
Yes, well, my background as a painter, I am French. I was born and raised in Paris and study art in Paris. And
where did you study?
I went to a school of applied art called Estienne, and then I did 1 year at the Beaux-Arts in Paris. And my first encounter, the way I decided to focus on Black bodies and using my classical training was one day in a field trip of school. I went to the Louvre and stumbled onto a piece called Portrait of a Negress, which today has been renamed Portrait of Madeleine, of a gorgeous portrait of this Black woman. And I think it was the first time I encountered a Black woman really taking space of one painting without anybody else around. But also what struck me is that I was so surprised to see her living in that time period, because I've never seen any representation like this, being in museums and in France, in classical art. And I think that really sparked my practice, just to see that painting.
Great. In terms of being inspired in Paris and just thinking of Carrie Mae Weems inviting us all into this space to think about change, what inspired you to move to Harlem and to the US as well, to create work about your experiences, but also historical references?
I think in Paris, even though I had the background, I feel I didn't really have the community to start the work I wanted to do. And before being in New York, I was in Los Angeles, and I believe that encountering African Americans and their history really spoke to me and really moved me in a way that I felt like I had to dedicate my practice to represent what I felt, and really marrying my Paris experience, my Caribbean heritage, and really what I was living every day in America. So, and I think that's why I started to form my practice and what I wanted to paint, and using themes of classical paintings like mythology, biblical stories, and allegorical representation to really insert Black bodies and rewriting our collective history.
Can you tell us about your archival research? How do you begin your practice in terms of archives?
Well, I do a lot of research. Thank you for Google and and libraries. Mm-hmm. And so usually it depends on the theme I want to start with, but I dig definitely into fashion. I have a lot of database about gowns that I take into, for example, the Met or the Metropolitan Museum has a beautiful database of incredible gowns that I use. Furnitures also, I look into Sotheby's, Christie's, and characters, and also because I also paint historical characters. People that I felt have been forgotten by history or were not shed, there's no light shed on them. So I do a lot of research on those characters as well, like B.D. Mason is one of them, or Chevalier de Saint-Georges, who I think they're going to make a movie out of him, and characters like that.
Hold 1 second. How many of you all know about B.D. Mason? So we have, 5, 6 people. So let's talk about Biddy Mason. That's one of my favorite pieces that you have.
Oh, thank you.
We had in the exhibition here. Do you want to, before we start about Biddy, do you want to show some work that you have on video? And then we can begin to think about all of these.
Right, maybe then we can digress a little bit. Well, because today, obviously, there's going to be this the unveiling of the portrait that was commissioned by the Park Armory Avenue, called Minerva. And Minerva is I chose the theme of the goddess because she was the goddess of war, but also she was the goddess of peace. She is contrary to her counterpart, like Mars. She never really dealt with war, with cruelty. She really had strategies and inventive strategies to lead victory. Therefore, she was also revered by craftsmen, military men, but also by artists and poets. So I felt like she was a good embodiment of what the Armory was and what the Armory is today and will be in the future. So it was combining different states of what the goddess is. Maybe we can change slides.
Can we? Yes, okay.
We can move on with that also. I think we've established. Do you want to talk about it? About this one?
We were really excited. Avery invited Kalia Brooks and I to curate a show for the Armory in about 4 years ago.
4 years ago, yes.
4 years ago. And of course, we thought about Elizabeth Colomba as a person to introduce historical paintings, but also introduce the experience of women in this space. And this is an interior of the exhibition space. We used hall down the road, down the way, and it was transformative. A number of people walked through, fascinated with the experience, but also the fact that Elizabeth understood the experience of women through history, and she transformed us and basically allowed us to reimagine a woman in the 19th century, a woman in the 18th century, but also through fashion. And so with that experience, I was really happy that Avery invited you to be a part of this experience of being the first woman painter in the Armory. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's. I still really cannot grasp the magnitude of it, but it's definitely an honor, and really that what we did, in 2017, really sparked that what happens today. So definitely, thank you. You are my godmother here, and Biddy Mason was shown there. Unfortunately, I don't have an example of her here. But the way I painted her, it's a proper portrait that you would think that was be done at the time. And she deserves certainly to have 10,000 portraits made of her because her story is incredible. So the people who don't know who she is, I'm going to try to sum up very quickly her story. She was enslaved, and she was born, I believe, in Georgia in the 19th century. And let me rephrase this. Mm-hmm. She did not move. Her master was Mormon and decided to cross from Georgia to Utah with her and her kids. She had 3 kids by him. Obviously, it was not willfully, but she had. And he made her walk behind the carriage, cross up into Utah, and then they pushed to California. I'm going to spare you the detail. I'm going to go quickly. And they moved to California. They went to California. And in California, Biddy Mason found out that California was a free state, and if you were able to stay 2 years in California, you were free as a slave. So she stayed put for 2 years, and after that time, she said to her master, "I'm out, yeah, bye." And of course, he tried to convince her to go back to Texas first with her, and that if she will, he promised her to free her and her kids. Obviously, she was not stupid, so she sued him and won. So she stayed in California. He left, clearly. And she stayed with her kids. And she was she was a midwife. She knew her herbs. She had a lot of incredible qualities and a gift. And she decided to apply that gift and sell it. So healing people, helping women. She saved money. Little by little, she gathered enough money to buy, first of all, a plot of land in LA. And with all the years, she managed to own what is today downtown LA. She was able to sell that land and became a millionaire and gathered a fortune of what would be $3 million today. And with that money, she gave back to the community, opened a church, and was...
church we all know today is Fame, First AME. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly. It's still open, it's still today, and she was helping people from any walks of life, any color, anything, as long as they're good people and they needed help. So she was a mogul, an entrepreneur, incredible person. So that's really why I wanted to have her portrait made. And I think now, and the portrait is now shown at LACMA right now, and I feel she's going to get bigger and bigger moment in her life. So hopefully,
yeah. And there's a monument downtown LA in the square, and it's really near City Hall, and that's really an amazing feat in terms of the storytelling that we find in portrait painting, and that's why I'm excited about the aspect of art and storytelling, because just in terms of corrective history and also inclusive history, we began to see how we, as Black people, contributed to this country that has been ignored in history and text as well in the visual history. Want to move to the next slide?
Yes, next slide, if we can. So that's the proposal that was given to the Armory to think about what could be the final painting. So you will see there's not a big difference between this proposal and the final work, except maybe some details that I would not point out.
But how did you decide in terms of the details? We know Minerva in terms of the use of her iconic studies of war and art. But how did you decide to use, and why did you decide to use some of the other objects in framing her within this room?
Well, because she was the goddess of wisdom, art, and war, so I wanted all these elements to really being placed in the painting. So you see on the table, there's a flute, is that the word? Yeah. Mm-hmm. There's a flute, which is the symbol of music. Also, she has on her head a crown of laurel wreath, which at the time were given to either people who won the war or poets. That's what I guess we call it, laureates. It's because it was laurel wreath. And you can see also there's the shield on the bottom left. There's also a spear, which are symbols of war, but also symbols that she laid down, which also was a wink to the Armory, meaning that it used to be about war, now it's about something else. So it's like dormant objects of war. And there's those two busts. One is the bust of a classical Minerva, I think, which is a bust, Italian bust from, I want to say, 17th century. Do not quote me on this. And another one, which is a bust of Cordier, French sculptor, of the Black Venus. Mm-hmm. And I wanted those things to play out on each other to create a bit of tension, but also symbolizing what was and what will be in the future. So that's how all those details are, playing together.
And when you submitted your proposal, you detailed all of this in the proposal as well as the visual?
Yes, mm-hmm. Yeah, okay. Absolutely.
Next slide.
So I use model for my work sometimes. And the model we have here is Grace Ball, who is not here today. And that's the film we shot at the Armory. So right now it's just the trailer, but you see it was, when was it, 2018, I believe, and we were commissioned by the Metropolitan Opera to shoot a short film. It's a project they did with several artists like Elizabeth Payton, Kondo, and you have to create something of under 2 minutes for the intermission, and then it's played worldly when the opera is playing. So that was an art project combined with the opera. If you want to play just the trailer for people just have an idea. So basically
A tease.
I know. You can go on the website. And but it also to show you that the relationship with the Armory starting with you in 2017, but keep on going throughout the years. So that was 2018, and today, again, I'm still working with him. So.
Okay. Fantastic.
Can we put on the next slide? Oh. So these are the details that are featured in the painting, and you see I also make a nod of certain things that you can find in the Armory, like the wallpaper and also the molding that being found. And these are the two busts that are featured in the painting as well. Which was the 17th century. I was right. So, can you go to the next slide, please? Well, so this is the process. So usually when I start a painting, so there's the study, and then I do what we call the grisaille, which here you can call the dead layer, which is the black and white black and white painting. And then I layer colors, and so that's what gives a bit of a vibrancy and almost a lighting that you cannot find any other way with other techniques. So you see the evolution of this and how certain things might have changed or might not. Certainly the lighting has been a bit more intense in the final work. If you can show the next slide. Yeah, that's it. That's the final work you can see here, much better than this. But I wanted to highlight also some details of the painting. So obviously the first detail is the face of the model, who's Grace Ball. But I want to direct your attention to detail number 5. So there's a bit of a backstory in the painting. So the painting traveled to Paris. At some point, I had to be in Europe for work, and due to the fantastic pandemic we're living, I was stuck in Paris, and there was a bit of a panic because I had to complete the painting, and then the painting had to be traveled and shipped to Paris, and I was able to finish it there. And I remember Avery told me that would be nice if you can put something as we remember that it traveled to Paris. And I put the address I stayed in the leg of the sculpture stand, and it's vignette number 5. And you see also the detail of the 6 is the detail of the shield, which is a shield with the face of Medusa, which was offered to Minerva by Perseus, I believe. You have also symbols of, in detail number 3 in her hand. 10 minutes, okay. And then on number 4, you have the owl, which is a symbol of wisdom for Minerva, but also the owl is eating a mouse, which is, destroying evil.
So impactful. This is really impactful.
It's packed with
packed with stories. And did we have any additional slides?
No, that's it. I think that's a wrap for the slides.
I have one other question before we open up to how much time do we have?
We have 10 minutes.
10 minutes, okay. So what is the feeling that you hope to evoke from introducing Minerva? Many of us who studied art history or Greek mythology know of Minerva, but what would you like for this painting to evoke here as we connect to all of the aspects? But in terms of children walking into this space, what do you hope for people to take away with, such as children and older people who rarely see a black face in this environment?
I would like the impact to be as meaningful as it was to me when I first stumbled into the portrait of a negress. In a place where you don't see yourself, you don't see representation. Mm-hmm. I would like when people when they see it, they understand that they are part of the history, they're part of the story they want to tell, and they also can walk into the future being active and being considered. And being included. So if they take something away from it, they really want them to be part of it, to feel they're part of it. Because, you can come into a world like this, a place like this, and not feel included just because of the grandeur of it. Mm-hmm. But when you see something that looks like you, it changes the narrative. So hopefully that's what we'll take away from it.
Thank you. And what projects are you currently working on for 2022-23?
Well, So I'm going to have a couple of paintings at the Met, I think, in April, I believe. I'm going to have
But just can't say a couple of paintings. Yeah. What's the title? What's the theme? We will definitely visit, but we want more than the tease you gave us of the video.
I like teasing people, obviously. I don't know the title yet, but it's in the context of how contemporary artists are approaching Winslow Homer, and how they include him in their work, and so it will be a take on that. So that's why I will have a couple of paintings in this show. I'll also be part of a still life show in San Francisco in March. And what else is there? I think I have a show in April. I did a graphic novel called Queenie, about Stephanie Sinclair, another woman that's been a bit ignored by history, who's a woman from Martinique who moved to Harlem in the 1920s and became a head of the mafia. I know. Incredible. True story. And she is, and I did a graphic novel about her. It was released in France and will be released in the US in September 2022. So I think I'm going to do a show about her, I think in April, with other comic book artists and female.
This is her first graphic novel?
First, might be the last, because it's a lot of work. And but I was definitely inspired by Kerry James Marshall, who also is working on a graphic novel. But in 2016, I remember he had this fantastic retrospective, and there was one room where he put all his graphic novel called The Rhythm Master. Mm-hmm. And I just thought, well, if this incredible fine art artist can do a graphic novel, maybe I can do one. So
you just reminded me, who are your influences, your painting influences?
As far as technique goes, I would definitely say Vermeer, just, the lighting, and definitely, Italian painters, Caravaggio or Velázquez, in terms of work. But as narratives, I would definitely say Kerry James Marshall is one of them. You were certainly one of them. Yes, yeah. Absolutely. Just having...
I didn't ask that question for that
answer. Yes, you did. But because, again, my narrative changed in my work, and I think having contemporary artists that I admire, and how they treat black bodies really influenced me in what I wanted to say. Yeah.
Well, I'm really encouraged by your work, and when I first met you, I fell in love with you. Fell in love with that red, the way you use red in your painting, and so that's like your red lipstick. So it really encourages the idea of beauty. Beauty has been ignored as a conversation when we're looking at black and brown skin, and you have really showed us beauty in its splendor and all the ways we can talk about it. But we have about 5 minutes left for questions. Does anyone have questions that you'd like to ask us wonderful artists?
Crickets.
I never could understand what that term meant, crickets.
Because they're chirping and in the silence. And, and they're the only one, because as soon as they hear something, they stop. So they only chirp when there's silence.
Okay. Okay, we have 2. Okay.
Oh, thank you.
Were you given a specific spot to hang your painting? Did you pick the spot? Is there significance to the spot, or not really?
I was given a specific spot. If I had a bigger spot, the painting would be bigger.
And there's another question.
Do you feel like there's a series around Minerva? Do you feel like she stands alone, or there's like more that will come after this?
I mean, I would love for her only to open the door, and that there's to have many more coming after this, hanging here. So yes, absolutely, there's always possibility.
That's a great question, because I felt the same, just looking at this piece and researching the title. I felt I can see a series coming out of this. So we know that's going to happen.
Yes, absolutely,
Put it out
100%.
there. Anyone else? Just in terms of, it's really hard to see. Okay, yes?
Great job again.
Thank you.
It's more of a comment. I'm glad you chose Minerva as well, because it's like one of the lesser known characters, like, Medusa or Venus, they're all sort of done so much, but Minerva, haven't thought about that game in a long time. But I think it's interesting, I told you outside, the conversation that's being had with the older generals on the wall and you, and the person that could be standing in the middle looking at both of them. It's like they're all looking at her, and she's like, I'm here. So it creates this sort of cognitive dissonance, you could easily write off these people on the wall and say, oh, I've seen it. But now it's like, oh, what's this? Like, you interrupted the flow, which is great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, thank you, everyone, for spending 45 minutes with us.
We have 10 more minutes. Look at that.
So we're putting you on the spot, so
I
let's
know.
talk about more. Let's talk about the interior of the painting when using the wood panels. Did you research the architect for the individual rooms or the design?
Yeah, I was actually gifted a book about the Armory, so I was able to pull some elements from it, also for the wallpaper. And I don't know if it's visible in the hallway, but the wallpaper is made out of gold leaf. So it's also reiterate the idea of goddess status and presence. So yeah, I was able to pull information from that book, which I think that's why they gifted me. I think it was a subtext there that I grasped clearly. Yeah.
I was just thinking about the painting you did of the lady in Brooklyn, the piece in, now it just left me,
Oh,
in Brooklyn, the,
Phyllis Whitley?
But we all know the space in Brooklyn that we visit, that was founded, and when I was in grad school, we worked on that. Weeksville, the Weeksville piece, thank you.
Yes.
So let's talk about how the photograph, we found the photograph years ago, but I'm just curious, creating a space for her, unknown, but representing a free community in Brooklyn. What did you decide, how did you decide to focus on Weeksville and
Well, it was
that image?
interesting when I learned about that community. I researched a little bit, and what I like about the idea that it was a safe haven. So that's the name of the piece is called Haven. But at the same time, because there was this weird history that was also the draft riot in New York, and I kind of wanted to combine both of them. The idea that if you were able to make it to Weeksville, you were safe. And create that idea of a paradise for a black community. But fast forward, I think in the 90s, there was different riots, which I think was between the Jewish community and the black community, which all of a sudden was not a safe place anymore. So I just thought it was interesting to see how history evolves and how neighborhoods can evolve today. And now, of course, now it's also very different.
I loved the connection of Safe Haven when we think of the women that you painted. They're all seeking safety for their families and for their communities, and I applaud you for that. But I'm curious if any other questions we have here. I want other people to take. Okay.
Yes.
Hello.
Hi.
I'm interested in looking at contemporary Black women artists and how their work facilitates health and wellness. And I'm interested specifically in what your art making process does for you, the artist, as well as how you may be wanting to connect with different communities. So who are you painting for, first and foremost? And how does it connect to your own personal wellness, if it does at all?
Well, it does connect because there's also, the way I paint, you might see that it takes a little bit of time. So it's a state of a bit meditation. After all my work and research has been done and I know what I'm going to paint, it's really getting into a zone where I'm able to really focus on what I do. And as far as reaching out to people, again, it's the idea that I want people to have the same reaction as I had when I first saw this black female person, Madeleine, in that portrait, and really be moved and understand that you are part of something, that you are not shunned and you are an active participant, and that you can recognize yourself into beauty and to any kind of or work of art. So I believe for anybody who would like to have a feeling about art, and whoever you are. So I would say that's what I paint for. And hopefully it's a lot of people.
Okay. Paulette?
Did you say your background, your Caribbean background, European background, and how would you say that?
That's, I'm sorry?
How does your background from the Caribbean, Europe, and the U.S. influence your work?
Well, certainly the French education, in the sense that being surrounded by what we call classical or historical art influence what I paint visually, and also in the technique. And being from the Caribbean and having this life in the U.S. Steep into the black community, I think it really shifted my narrative. And I think both of them can appear in my paintings, depending of course on the theme, but I think the idea of colonialism and enslavement are a part of what I talk about in my work. So I would say three of those embody me, and hopefully are perspiring in my work as well.
Are there any opportunities for us to see your work in the city, or do you have open studio
I
opportunities?
do not have open studio, but if you contact me, I would absolutely open my studio for a catered studio visit.
Great. Well, thank you so much. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Southern trees bear strange fruit, blood on the leaves and blood at the root, black bodies swinging in the southern breeze. Strange fruit hanging from the poplar tree. scene of the gallant South, the bulging eyes and the twisted mouth, scent of magnolia, sweet and fresh. Then the sudden smell of burning flesh. Here is a fruit for the crows to pluck, for the rain to gather, for the wind to suck, for the sun to rot, for the tree to drop. Here's a strange and bitter
Until the killing of a black mother's son becomes important as the killing of a white mother's son, we who believe in freedom cannot rest. Ella Baker. And yes, as hurt and angry as we always are when killers walk away, each time we are still disappointed because we want to be wrong about this place we call home. Farah Jasmine Griffith. For survival, black children in America must be raised to be warriors. Audre Lorde. You said it takes time. It took my father's time. It took my mother's time. It took my brother's time. How much more time do you want? James Baldwin. Wolves with the sound of the wind. It was all that warrior could hear. That and the drums. The speaker's hands beat them slowly, forcefully, announcing an arrival. The ceremony had begun. As warrior had lain in bed, the bright sun had shone through his window, waking him, the brightness making him squint in its glare. His mother and sister had left the house hours before he had awakened, on one of their adventures created to fill the school snow day. Warrior knew they were either walking the galleries of a museum or gliding around the ice skating rink in the middle of the park. Wherever it was, he had missed out on the adventure, having slept off the effects of the liquor. It was past midday. He got out of bed and took a long, hot shower. He got dressed in black, black boots, black jeans, black sweatshirt, black leather jacket, black skull cap. The day called for black. It felt good on his skin. He locked all of the locks and walked down the stairs. He wanted to see the aftermath of the storm, to see what remained in its wake. As he left his building and felt the snow still falling, he smiled. Nature had not yet finished answering. The flakes dropped gently against his face. They were light, as if they drifted with no force. The storm had fought hard, but it had lost the great battle, and now its flakes were melting before they reached the ground. But the snow that had accumulated during the night was piled high, reaching to Warrior's waist, testimony to the great struggle waged under the glow of the moon. But even the fury with which the snow had fallen could not prevent the coming of whatever it was that nature had fought. Surrounded by the sound of the wolves and the beating of the drums, Warrior could feel its presence. By late afternoon, he stood in the belly of the beast, a beast whose innards are filled with the chaos that is its nourishment. There was snow everywhere. No stores were open, and the traffic lights swayed, many of their bulbs broken, the wind having won at least that battle. Within this silence, bedlam ruled the streets. Blue soldiers were everywhere. They ran, wearing helmets with long visors that covered their throats, carrying clear, bulletproof shields, their batons raised high in the sky. There was the deafening sound of sirens, of glass breaking, and voices shouting. Blue and red lights flashed, their swirling colors filling eyes as the blue soldiers' cars were the only ones that moved through the streets, their tires spitting snow as they turned. The soldiers ran frantically, trying to repair the invisible walls that had broken. These walls had taken centuries to build. The mortar was hard, but the brick brittle. It had taken only the morning to bring them down. And as we speak, the masons are coming. Word on the street was that it had happened early that morning. The blue soldiers had shot a boy, and finally folks decided it was time. Nobody bothered to ask what time it was just time. Warrior looked out at the commotion as he walked among the crumbling walls, and he thought of other walls. We break these walls so that they can see what has been done to us. But what we don't seem to understand is that they know the world being lived within these walls better than we do ourselves, because they created them. Bringing down the walls doesn't change the lives being lived inside of them. It only brings the sight of the lives to those who are blind. Walk the streets with me, see what I see, and tell me what has changed. Salvation won't come from outside these walls, it'll come from within. The sound you hear is the laughter of demons. They relish the fact that we have not learned, that we still believe that if we cry loud enough, that the creators of the walls will hear us and show us the way out. The demons laugh, knowing that only we can bring about our deliverance from their hell. And instead of attacking the demons, we waste our time on walls. As Warrior turned the corner, he saw two young boys running, narrowly evading the swinging batons of the four blue soldiers. The batons were getting closer. The boys were out of breath, and though fear drove their weary legs through the snow, they would soon falter and fall into the hands of the soldiers. Warrior continued walking as the speaker's hands began to sweat, the drums beating faster. Warrior realized that the overwhelmed soldiers were depending on the freezing cold to aid them in clearing the streets. The weather was brutal, and as the sun began to descend, the temperature dropped even further. And many of the people who had been out all day started to make their way home. These crowds had stood on sidewalks, watching the action, observing the rage, wanting to keep a safe distance from the fires. But above all the calls of the voices, in a different realm from the shrieks of the sirens, the explosion of gunshots, and the breaking of glass, Warrior heard the wolves. They kept him company, their familiar sound walking with him as he moved through the streets. Warrior had listened differently on this day. He had tried to take himself within their sound. He had tried to enter the world of the wolves, to speak their language, to join their pack. It was no longer enough to hear their sound. He had to know what it was that they sought, what drove them. Warrior walked the streets, looking down at the pavement, listening to the wolves. When he finally brought his eyes up from the ground, Warrior saw Weatherman. Weatherman was outside of the park, and this was something Warrior had never seen. He stood in the middle of the block on the front steps of an abandoned building, mumbling. He held his umbrella in both hands, pointing it up at the searing sun. His head was twitching, but the rest of his body was rigid. The umbrella did not waver, its steadiness seeming true. As Warrior moved closer to Weatherman, he heard that the words were being spoken softly, their muffled sound escaping through Weatherman's tightened jaw. Weatherman's eyes stared straight ahead. The wind speaks and no one listens. The rain screams and no one hears. Lightning brings light to blind eyes, thunder sound to deaf ears. Nature reaches and teaches, but nobody follows. Her word, I hear her word. She's my God. And your gods are? Your fire is here, and what has it brought? Open your eyes, it's seeing times, and seeing always teaches more than being sold, because now we don't even own our own eyes. We see through eyes transplanted through centuries, filled with visions of the wrong damn times. So what do we do with a lost people? A wandering tribe that no longer knows the way. The bones know, ask the bones. Want to know pain? Imagine dying in the spirit world. We need our eyes back, but since we ain't got time to wait, maybe we can reach them through voice. Maybe they can hear their way to freedom. It's a long path from the beast. Gotta have a guide. Time to go to the blood council and ask them for a voice to reach the wandering ones. Yeah, that'll do. Listen now, because the word only comes once. Brothers and sisters, I come to you this evening to talk about a dragon. Yes, I said a dragon. Brothers and sisters, I come to you this evening to talk about a boy. But you see, the story I tell you this evening don't begin with no dragon and don't begin with no boy. This story begins with a woman. What her name was is not important. What is important is that you know she was strong. Now, when this woman was large with child, when she carried a life inside of her womb, she engaged in a battle that shook the very foundation of this world. I say the very foundation. This child that breathed inside of her was her firstborn, not the seventh son, but the first. And when she became heavy with child, when it came time for her to bear, the heavens began to swirl and lightning broke across the sky and thunder pounded the earth and the ground became restless. And then what had been foretold came to pass. The dragon reared its head. The scripture reads, and the dragon stood before the woman, which was not ready to be delivered, for to devour her child as soon as it was born. This dragon would not even give her child the chance of life. The dragon lay by the woman's sweating and straining body, waiting, seeking to make her child his meal. And from her womb, this woman brought forth a man-child. And we are told that when this man-child was born, the woman was given the wings of a great eagle so that she might soar to the wilderness and away from the jaws of the beast. And in this bosom she would be nourished, and her child would be nourished for time and half a time. Here in the wilderness, she would be free from the face of the dragon. And when the dragon came to realize that the woman had escaped from its clutches, that the fate it had destined for the woman's young child had been evaded, the dragon was filled with a fury that could not be contained, and it shook the earth. And so this dragon called forth its demons, and there was war in the wilderness. The woman and the angels fought, and the dragon and its demons fought, and there was war in the wilderness. War. And when the dragon and its kin seemed too strong, when the wrath of the beast seemed too mighty, the woman and the angels fought harder. And it is here that scripture teaches us, and they overcame the dragon by the blood and by the word of their testimony. I said by the blood and by the word of their testimony. And when the dragon saw that it was defeated, rage rolled down. The book tells us, and the dragon was wroth with the woman and went to make war with the remnant of her seed. The dragon could not defeat the mother, so it sought out the child. But what the dragon failed to see, what was its fatal mistake, was that this man-child carried the same blood in his veins as that of his mother. And his life had come to pass here in the word of her testimony. The dragon sought to make war with the seed, but others stood with it. The seed carried the blood, knew the word, and had heard the testimony. He would not stand alone. That is why he's known as the man-child. That is why we tell his story. That is why we spread his word. And so it has been said. As Weatherman finished speaking, his body swayed, resting, limply against the side of the stone stoop that led up to the boarded-up building. Then he lifted his bowed head and turned in the direction of Warrior. Imagine that, weatherman getting a spirit. Ain't that something? Guess the council working in mysterious ways these days. Weatherman slowly shook his head, calmed his voice, and regained its whisper. He moved down the steps of the stoop, his umbrella leading the way, his hushed voice once again carrying on about the weather. He walked down the street, carefully making his way back to the park, to the protection of his true God. Warrior stood at the foot of the stoop, watching Weatherman walk away. Weatherman's words had joined the cries of the wolves and the beating of the drum, and now Warrior's mind was pulsing, full of sounds and voices. The wolves were shrieking louder than Warrior had ever heard them, their call almost sounding human, tormented souls finally on the heels of their redemption. Blue soldiers sped by, their car sirens blasting. Bottles were thrown, glass shattered, and somewhere close by gunshots rang out. Warrior looked down the street and saw that the soldiers were running, trying to find the shooter. As Warrior stood alone on the stoop, a river of blood flowed past him. The wolves were all around him, lining the banks of the river. Warrior thought for a moment they had come to feed, to drink from its depths, until he heard one sustained howl, one wolf crying out desperately for the first time. For the first time, Warrior truly heard the call. The wolf was not crying out for food. He was being held captive. And seeing the river's powerful current, he was deciding whether he would be carried away to his long desired freedom. The wolves had never been searching for food. They had been following Warrior out of hunger. They were being driven by the demons, the same ones who endlessly tracked him. The wolves were crying out for their release. Warrior heard the bottomless laugh of the claw, and as he listened to the laugh, he heard the whip of the claw's demon's kin descend, driving the wolves from the river's edge. They had come to witness the chaos that was their creation. As his pack fled at the cracking of the whip, the lone howling wolf pointed his nose towards the sky and let out one long, last haunted cry, and then leapt into the bloody river. As Warrior watched the river's current carry the wolf away, he was overcome by the sound of the drums that beat violently, almost too fast. As the speaker's hand struck them, they screamed. Warrior ran. He ran from the sight of the river and from the sound of the wolves who once again were locked in their cage. He ran from the demons who called after him with whispers, laughing, mocking, "Run, warrior, run, 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 run." He ran past the blue soldiers and their red and blue swirling lights, paying no mind to their call to stop, his powerful legs carrying him quickly out of their reach. He ran through snowbanks, over shattered glass, and past burning buildings. He ran through dark blocks, turning corners blindly, staying close to the buildings, away from the streetlights and in the shadows. As he ran, he pulled up his black hood over his already covered head and melted into the darkness. He ran past alleys and past buildings out of which poured music, past night walkers, past still open corner stores, past children playing in the snow and the elders who watched them from windows. Warrior ran. He ran and ran and ran. He reached the subway station, grabbing hold of the railing, and fled down the stairs, his chest heaving, the sweat feeling good on his chilled skin. Warrior looked down the tracks, and seeing the two bright white lights winding through the darkness tunnel, he breathed deeply, relieved that the train was coming. When it came to a stop in front of him and the doors opened, he walked into the empty train and sat down. He pulled his hood on tighter, the sides serving as blinders, hiding his face from other eyes. He tried to quiet the pounding in his head and his heavy breathing, but it was no use. The train snaked out of the station and sped towards Brooklyn. Warrior stepped inside the brownstone, then turned to shut the mighty oak wood door behind him. It was warm inside his father's home, and Warrior could hear all the familiar sounds that filled the house. He could hear his father moving around upstairs, most likely searching through the unending pile of books, records, and song sheets that littered the floor, or filing through the two massive steel file cabinets whose towering presence rose up from the floor to the ceiling. Within its deep drawers were the old family photographs, childhood drawings, school report cards, long ago sent letters, deeds to southern lands, and freedom papers, all the carefully kept history of a family. Warrior heard his father moving around and imagined him sitting at the foot of one of the files, surrounded by yellow papers, remembering. The sound that was heard above all others, the one that claimed the air, was as usual music, or as his father always said, voice. This night the word was being passed by Coltrane. His horn told tales of worlds that only he had seen, worlds others doubted even existed, but Train knew. Warrior walked up the stairs to the second floor, leaning heavily on the banister. As he moved, he heard Train, and the drums that filled his own ears joined the cry of the horn and kinship, sharing a conversation that some had named, a name Warrior had no need for, having long ago decided just to listen. His father was playing his favorite piece of music, one that merged love and the sanctified, two songs into one, pursuance and psalm, from the spiritual journey called A Love Supreme. Warrior knew it well. He walked into what had once been his room and felt peaceful, though the walls were bare, all of his possessions having been moved to Harlem. For him, the room was still the deepest part of home. Even in its darkness, it held many memories. It felt safe and familiar. The dark stained furniture was the same, the walls were still winter green, the old thick brown drapes hung low, sealing off all light from outside, and the bedspread made of the same material, but a more earthy shade of dusty red-brown, still covered the small sunken bed. At the head of the bed on the night table was the one picture that remained. It had been taken the day Warrior's mother had come home with his sister from the hospital. His mother was in her bed, dressed in a white nightgown, tired but glowing, holding her daughter against her breast with one arm, as Warrior's father, smiling from ear to ear, lay on the bed with her, one hand resting gently on his daughter's head, one wrapped around his wife. Warrior was not looking at the camera, but staring wide-eyed at his sister, leaning on the end of the bed, his mother's hand in his. Warrior took off his jeans and his sweatshirt, keeping his undershirt on. Earlier in the day, the cold had given him a deep chill, and he still hadn't recovered. In fact, it had gotten worse, and now he was shivering. The room was warm, since his father always kept the heat on high, so warm it felt almost damp as the heat fought the cold that raged just outside the windows. He closed the door, needing silence. He pulled back the cover and climbed into bed. As he lay in the dark room, his lungs heaved, desperately seeking air. In the silence, he heard only the sound of the beating of the drums. The speaker's hands had lost control, and the drums pulsed wildly. There was no rhythm, no order, no time. Thank you.
Oh, that's so nice. Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming down this way. How many folks here have been to the Armory before? Oh, amazing, amazing. I'm so happy to hear that. So I'm Avery Willis Hoffman, and I'm the outgoing program director here at the Armory. And Carrie asked me just to say a couple things about my journey here, and so I wanted to share a few things, and then we have two amazing ladies who are going to join me, and we're just gonna have a chill conversation about where we've been and where we want to go. And we hope if you guys have questions, we'll just keep this really chill. It's been a long day, a long couple of days, and we're just really interested in your thoughts. So if you have questions, please feel free to raise your hand and jump in. So I just want to say a couple things. My journey's been really very as an outsider would say, like very strange and winding, right? Like, how did you get to the Park Avenue Armory? And Carrie asked me that long ago when we first started talking about her coming here to the Armory to do a residency. And I thought about it, and I've been thinking about it a lot over the last couple days. It's been an extraordinary couple days. And for me and Carrie, it started as a child because, as many of you may or may not know, the late Toni Morrison was my aunt. And as a beacon of light and inspiration in my family, I got to meet so many incredible people and incredible friends of hers. And one of them happened to be Carrie Mae Weems. So as a child, I was really surrounded by extraordinary artists, by incredible thinkers. My father was a professor at Princeton for 37 years, so I was a faculty brat on the Princeton campus. I'm sure I caused a lot of trouble, but I was so inspired by the folks that Toni surrounded herself with. Cornel West and Skip Gates were kind of my uncles. And so, you know, it's kind of one of those things when you think about your life and you think about where you've been and who's influenced you. And as I sort of went through my early years, the academic kind of life was really something I thought I would explore. I was super nerdy and really loved the classics. I loved thinking about different ways to interpret the classics. That was something that became very important. I went on to do a PhD, of course. You can imagine who guided me in that direction, Professor Father. And, you know, Toni kept saying to me, what about your writing? What about your creativity? You're a creative person. And, you know, when I was little, I would write these stories and she would redline them. And I'd get it back. I was like 7, 8, you know, my handwriting was terrible. And I'd get it back and like the only word left was like the, you know. Like she was so generous with me. She took time to guide the creative spirit. So I had these sort of two folks in my life who pulled me between the scholarly and the artistic. And that was a real treat. And so what's really interesting to me as I think back and taking these moments, you know, across the pandemic and also just in the last few days, I, you know, went to do my PhD in Oxford and met incredible people from all around the world and did my thesis on Trojan women, Euripides' Trojan women. And discovered that it was a play of activism and that so many artists had used it as a weapon against war, right? An anti-war play, which was really an extraordinary moment. And in all of my research, I discovered, actually, I want to put this play on, right? I've always been in the theater, I've always been in a creative life, but to direct that play was a kind of aha moment for me. And so I was heading in this academic direction and suddenly realized that my sort of extracurricular activity was actually my joy and really what sustained me and what I wanted to pursue. And so I was chatting with Toni, and I said, you know, I was in one of those angsty moments that graduate students are in, and she said, look, you have to meet my friend. And I said, oh, of course, I'll love to meet your friend. It turned out to be Peter Sellers. And so at that time, I thought, okay, I have to finish my PhD, you know, honor my father's wishes. I finished my PhD and I met Peter in the vitamin section at Fairway Market, which I can't remember, is that Upper East Side or Upper West Side somewhere? Yes, you know it. So I met him and I thought, why am I meeting in the vitamin section? This is really strange. Well, there are tables there. I don't know if they're there anymore, but there are tables in the vitamin section. You know, that began a nearly 20-year relationship, which has been next to Toni, my most treasured creative relationship. And we've been all around the world together, and I've had incredible opportunities to be an assistant director, a company manager, a dramaturg. We worked on incredible projects together, one of which being, my goodness, Othello with Philip Seymour Hoffman and Jessica Chastain, which was, I'm having flashbacks, that was really an intense time. So all to say, the journey's important, and I think as I think about all of the things that I've done with Peter across time, one of my sort of really joyful times with him was starting to think about programming around artistic projects. So I'm getting to the Armory, I'm getting there. And so we began, and Peter has always done this for many, many years, to do conversations, to do sometimes heated exchanges between people you wouldn't expect on stage before a show actually begins. So with Othello, for example, we had scholars talking about the role of Othello. We had, various people engaging in the themes of Othello. We did a project called Zaid, which was really, his lens was modern slavery, and so we really looked at all kinds of folks in that kind of those who advocate for slaves and those who prosecute those who keep slaves. It was, several years ago now when it became a thing that it was possible to expose this idea of modern slavery. And so we had those folks on stage, and then we did an opera. We did a Mozart opera, Zaid. So all to say, over these years and through this journey, who is in the room has become very important. And the community that comes to a space because of the folks that you invite is important, right? You all are important in this conversation and what this place is doing, right? So as I went through this journey with Peter, I also had to have a day job, it wasn't constant work, and so many different day jobs. I won't even tell you about them all. But one of them ended up being 5 years and ended up being something that was unexpected. It was one of the best interviews I ever had. We were on hiatus from touring, and I ended up interviewing with Ralph Applebaum, who some of you may know. He's a museum designer. He designed the Holocaust Museum. And he looked at my CV and he said, I get this. I get your journey. I get that you worked for Bill Clinton for, this period of time and did this work. I get that you have done this and that and worked at Focus Features and all these other things. So he said, we're doing museum work and I'm looking for someone who can help shape an experience. And we ended up winning the bid for the Smithsonian's National Museum of African American History and Culture. And so I spent 5 years working on that project and building an experience. I don't know if has anyone been there? Amazing. So that journey that you take, going into the bowels of the earth and feeling and experiencing and seeing and learning about our history as you rise up, through that story, that was intentional, and that was an experience, a programmatic experience that we worked on. So fast forward, Peter called me up one day and said, I'm doing this project at the Park Avenue Armory. Would you like to come and help me do some programming? And so that was nearly 6 years ago. And ever since then, I think it's been a new twist in the journey to think about how the Armory can reach out into the communities that we serve. We've done some really extraordinary public programming. Some of you may have been to the powwow that we did, which was very, very special to the Lenape community, which had not gathered on Manhattan Island, for quite a long time. We did the Black Artist Retreat with the Astor Gates, again, bringing in a community of artists. Some of you may have attended those things. And then as the pandemic hit us, we were in the middle of 100 Years, 100 Women, which was a project meant to uplift women artists, and it was an incredible just union of institutions across the city. So I could go on and on and on and on, but I think that I'm really very proud to have known Carrie as a child and to have thought that she would be someone who could dream so beautifully in our drill hall. Carrie became an artist in residence about 5 years ago when I just started, and I thought, there are a couple people who would be really great to be here. Lynn Nottage, the Astor Gates, Carrie Mae Weems. And so they all became artists in residence and have been brewing just incredible projects along the way. So that invitation to her was just extraordinary in the sense that she has participated in almost everything we've invited her to do. She was a featured artist in 100 Years, 100 Women. She was an amazing force during Black Artist Retreat. She, of course, we did the original, the 1.0 Shape of Things back in 2017. So all to say, it's been a journey, and those who are with you along the way are important. And so when Carrie asked me to take a moment, I thought of two amazing, amazing ladies, and in fact 3, and sadly Daisy had to have emergency dental surgery this morning, so she couldn't be with us. But I thought of these 2 incredible women who have inspired me along the way, and I thought I'd invite them to join me, Shanta and Naomi, and maybe talk a little bit about their journeys, if you'll let us. So please. So I wanted to just start by saying thank you for being here, and a real question of how are you? Like, really, how are you? So maybe starting with you, Naomi, how are you? And what are you thinking about these days? And then maybe you can evolve into your journey a little bit, and we could go from there.
Thank you. Is this on? Can everyone hear me? Great, thank you. I just want to preface quickly with 2 things before I get into how am I, which will be slightly confessional. One, I want to say congratulations to you, because I know not only have you been programming amazingly over the last 5 years, but this entire event is kind of a swan song for you. So I think it's a brilliant thing for you to cap off your time and tenure here at the Armory with such an amazing colossus of a program, and really congratulate and thank you for that. And then the second quick thing is I am completely obsessed with this room, which I've never been. It is beautiful. It is absolutely beautiful, and I've acquired this sort of taste for these kind of medieval-looking sort of spaces that have this, these references to both Greco-Roman and Moorish architecture. So anyway, thank you for having us in here. How am I? The confession, I woke up today at 11:15 in the late morning, and so that gives you a good enough sense of, I've been busy to the point that I have to take recuperative time. I am, that said, clearly, because despite the fatigue, still feeling hopeful, still feeling very hopeful, and I wouldn't have taken a job at an institution if I had not seen a space in which I could intervene. And I also know that we could, as a group of people, cultural workers, cultural consumers, what have you, spend all day, and many of us do, thinking about the problems of these institutions, but I've also committed myself to thinking about problems as opportunities. So if there were no problems, there would be no work to do at all. And so I really take that as a mandate and even a gift to do that work. The journey. In a nutshell, I basically planned my life to become a doctor, like, bright Black children in Christendom, and but took a left turn during college, a left turn that really started in high school, where I worked with the artist Mark Dion, who'd been invited to come to Chicago and do a program. And Mark, as part of his practice, tends to work with high school students, and his practice really is around interrogating natural history as an art practice, like building out dioramas, building out mini museums, and so forth and so on. And he always works with art students and science students, and I came to him as a science student who, had all sorts of plans and was pre-med and undergrad, but really realized that I would be miserable as a doctor and probably would kill some people. And so when I had to think back to other career goals, or even possibilities, seeing how I had planned to be a doctor since I was 3, this wasn't something parents put into my head. This was me. I really, and later in life, as I matured, I really wanted to work on Black women's health. So I was committed to gynecology. But anyway, left turning out of the sciences got me reminiscing about this time with Mark Diane, thinking about the year-long sort of pedagogical program that he built up for us as students, thinking about our tours to rainforest and Belize and doing natural history projects and field research there. And I thought this is going to be the way forward for me. Thinking and working through art, but understanding that art is this capacious field where you can pull in so much. You can pull in science, you can pull in ecology, you can pull in philosophy, you can pull in history, and so forth. And so I went on to grad school and did a degree at the Courtauld Institute in London, where the subject of my thesis was Adrian Piper, and a one, Carrie Mae Weems. So that's really how I began to dive deeply into Carrie's work and thinking about the possible stories that these 2 Black women have laid out for art history. That wasn't the story that I'd been taught in this time prior. But I just want to add one little thing, which is, as you rightly point out, Avery, these journeys, there is, of course, a history that we all go through, but there are different articulations of that journey. And when I listen to you talk about your path really starting in childhood, I would say so did mine, right? Even though I was focused on the sciences, at that time, I also happened to be blessed to grow up on the south side of Chicago at a time where people really thought that the struggle for Black liberation was still deeply important to the development of community, the development of this nation. But also, the arts were integral to that work. There was no separation between activism and art. And so in many ways, the way in which I grew up going to sort of street fairs and taking African dance classes and, these sort of painting programs and great Black history programs that, were part of the kind of the everyday fabric of my life, that was the thing that allowed me to imagine that there were other art histories that needed to be told. And that, I think, really put me on the career course that I'm on now and continuously.
Beautiful. Shanta.
Hello, everyone. First of all, if I was a doctor, if I had a PhD, I'd be putting doctor in front of my name every chance I got. I'd be introducing myself, I'd be correcting people. So anyway, it's an honor to be here and to be with these 2 incredible women. How I am always optimistic. I am a glass half full, overflowing kind of person. I'm anxious about what is next in terms of funding running out. What happens when art institutions decide that they have to cut back even further than we have already? When audiences don't come back? How do we make the case for live performance and gathering? All of those things, I think, are swirling in my head all of the time. I feel like I wake up with those ideas sort of firmly planted. And figuring out what is the case that we are making, both for the value of arts, for the value of gathering, for the practice of coming together, and also the practice of coming together in a global urban environment. And what does that mean? How can we make the case for that going forward, for our friends and our neighbors and those who have left that we want to come back? So that's how I am. My journey, actually, I found so much resonance in what you were saying, Dr. Avery, because I too have an aunt that very much influenced my journey, which is my aunt is Sadi, and she, from the time I was about 10, started working at Alvin Ailey as Judith Jamison's assistant, and continues to be Robert Battle's assistant. And so I grew up coming to New York, spending an enormous amount of time with Miss Jamison at Christmas dinners and just as part of our sort of extended family, and seeing the incredible female leadership, Black leadership, at that organization of not just Miss Jamison, but also Sylvia Waters and Denise Richardson And just really watching these women, it only occurred to me much later that is something that I just never questioned, that women, black women, women of color would soar as leaders. That's something that when other people question it, I've thought, oh, that never occurred to me, or never occurred to me that these were actually this was a rare organization that had women like this at the head of, these very prestigious high art, So those were most of my experiences of seeing big work was of that company. And when I would come to New York, one of my formative moments going to New York was also seeing Bring in the Noise, Bring in the Funk, which totally transformed my idea of what live performance was and what theater was. And I remember actually in that moment looking at the playbill, thinking like, who created this? Where was this? So that was my first real intersection with the public theater. I never saw Shakespeare in the Park until I moved here, but I certainly saw Bring in the Noise, Bring in the Funk, and I saw Top Dog, and then I moved to New York, and I got a job working in George Wolfe's office, very fortuitously, as his second assistant right after 9/11 when they had laid off a considerable amount of staff. And so I came in working for, $100 a week, and working about 50 hours a week for that paycheck. And also I had gone to school to be an actress. So I had fallen in love with theater somewhere in high school. I also thought I was going to be a doctor somewhere along the way. And moved to theater as soon as I, really started seeing and understanding the power of live performance and really wanting to be a part of it. And I thought I would be on stage being a part of it. But once I was working in George's office, really saw how much more fun I was having on the other side versus waiting in lines to audition for things that I really didn't want to be in. So, and that is, the journey went on a variety of paths, but stayed pretty much under the same roof of the public theater where I worked for 19 years, and now I am uptown at Lincoln Center.
I love that you say that so casually. Now I'm uptown. We are at 3 institutions of note, shall we say, in the city. I'm wondering about the moment of entry for each of you, the sort of moment where either it became clear that this was your next gig, or when you actually walked in that door for the first time in these amazing positions. Congratulations, both of you. What is on your mind in that moment, and how, if it has evolved since that moment?
That's a really interesting question. For those of you who may not know, I'm now at the Guggenheim Museum, also uptown. Though I realize there are multiple uptowns, because I used to be the Studio Museum, which is very uptown, but I was like, okay, there's a very different uptown than the Upper East Side. I've really thought a lot about my work as situated, right? And that means basically in sites. And the question is, where can I be at a site and do the most useful work? I've been at the MCA Chicago for 10 years prior. Chicago was my hometown, as I mentioned earlier. And so there was so much incredible work that I did do there and could do there. But I also realized that there was a much bigger platform that could be had around the narrative of art histories that I wanted to form, and a bigger bully pulpit that the Guggenheim offered. And I also went there understanding something that has really become a lot more cemented as I've been there, which is the Guggenheim has always been a little bit of an enfant terrible as we talk about the big 4 institutions, right? There's the Met, who gives you the arc of human creative capacity. There's a moment that has like sort of one through line in terms of what modern art history is. And there's a Whitney that's super focused on American art, so they have their like deep mandates. And the Guggenheim's kind of floating along, like we've got this beautiful building, we've got this interesting collection, but for the most part, they're kind of agnostic, really, about the story of art. And I thought, this is brilliant. This is a way forward. And the more I delved into the history, the more I realized that this was an institution founded with people in mind. with literally world peace in mind, with this sense that you can bring art to audiences and have and create moments that are both intellectual and spiritual. And so much of that may sound utopian now, but we are in a moment where I think a little utopic thinking is necessary. So that was the thing that sort of shifted in the way I've imagined the institution, you know, that I knew there was a possibility, but I didn't really understand what their narrative was. And then, of course, primarily I'm thinking about my team. Everybody has been traumatized for all the reasons you laid out, Shanta, in this last 2 years. And I don't use that word traumatized lightly. It has been really tough to watch every institution feel like it's on the brink of collapse. And everyone really taking up that question of how do we really argue for what we do? That is not necessarily quote unquote income generating. That is not seeing a kind of direct payback in people's lives, monetary sort of payback in people's lives, when we're sort of fighting for city and federal resources. And we're all sort of grappling with that same question and, you know, not really coming yet to a full answer, but really trying to work it out. And then my institution in particular had a very public sort of, we call it the reckoning, but really a very public set of debates that, you know, are still continuing internally. It's quieted a little bit, but these are still conversations. And so my role is not only to think about the programming and what we send to the audiences, but really also to think about how to care for people, how to make them feel enabled again, how to really get them to express a sense of meaning and purpose in their work. They're not just filling a task and creating a calendar, but how do we get them to make a narrative around the journey of the work we're doing? And so if there's something that gives me anxiety, it's that, like that sense of care for the team that is just as important as a public-facing program that we put out.
Yeah, I would say, actually, you know, I'm still in the sort of welcoming moment, having started in September. So maybe I will look back on this differently than how I feel right now. But right now, I feel an enormous sense of gratitude to an institution that made some big pivots a few years ago, actually, around a renewed focus on equity, diversity, inclusion, and actually put real resource towards that. A real shift towards civic responsibility that then manifested in really understanding what it is, the real estate of having public space during a pandemic, and how to best use that to serve the community was well underway. And I mean, probably 4 out of 5 people told me before I came to Lincoln Center, oh, the culture shift is, you know, it's going to be huge. It's going to be completely shocking how, you know, you'll find your people and there'll be a small group and in a corner somewhere, but, you know, you're going to really have to look for them and then start from there. And I don't feel that at all. I feel everyone also very tired, very traumatized, but also really ready for whatever is next, and also really able to embrace what has happened, but also let go of what has happened. And so, you know, again, I'm coming from a very optimistic frame, which is how I tend to work, but I really do, I see so much possibility, and I think that idea of the duty of care to one another, the way that we really must be kind to one another, has a completely different resonance, I think, now. It's not a question of should I, you know, do we have time to be kind? Do we have time to care about each other? We actually have to, because the minute we don't is you can see things unraveling. You know, everybody, it's so on the edge, and I know that that's every single arts organization, every single community that I'm a part of feels that way. Very fragile, which I really see as just this enormous opportunity to lead with kindness and generosity from everywhere, from anywhere you're sitting. And that really feels, it feels almost, you know, contagious in a good way. But it really, I think it's possible. It's possible to build a new kind of organization in this moment where we have to be confronted with the care of one another.
Thank you for saying that. And that was actually going to be my next question. You know, we are in this moment, and what does leadership mean to you? You know, I'm sure as I've had, each of us have models of leadership that's very positive and maybe models that are not positive. What do you take from those models? What are the things that you feel in this moment make a good leader, a great leader, an inspiring leader? No pressure. You know, and I think what you just said about care is kind of number one, right? But what are some of the other things that you either obviously think about or under the surface think about?
I think about a model of leadership that is very much based on, again, this kind of pan-African or Afrocentric moment that was part of my upbringing, which is really about doing things collectively and collaboratively, right? So it's not entirely a top-down structure. Clearly there'll be more ascendant voices and people with responsibilities, but this idea that nothing ever happens without a lot of input, a lot of energy. And so I think of my role less as kind of, you know, sort of out in front of people, but more really imagining how I can get everybody feeling empowered and enabled to do the thing we do. Now, I might be the one sort of mapping out a little bit of the direction or the thing that we do, setting that project, but I also realize that I can't be out taking credit for everything, right? I can't be directing everyone, but I need to be taking advantage of their own intellectual capacities and their creative ideas. And then secondly, when I think a lot about leadership, this isn't so much about a model per se, but I'm clear about the symbolic capacity of myself or Shanta or Daisy or Isolde or, you know, any number of women, or Denise, who are taking on significant roles in institutions. On a practical level, I realize for many people, I am the first black boss they have ever had, right? So I know that in my position, I have to be sensitive to the kind of histories of leadership that they've seen and how they see black women in general, but what does it mean to map that on to a leadership model and what it means for me to occupy that. I also know that it means becoming a symbol for other people to enter into this field. You know, we all say that some folks can't see it until it's seen, right? They can't imagine it until it's seen. And so that was also one of the reasons I wanted to take on this position, because it was important to make a model for other people. Not be the model per se, but at least be a visual model. So that's what I sort of think about when I imagine what my leadership role is now.
I feel very fortunate that I get to answer all these questions second. I'm like, yes, what she said. But yes, I mean, exactly that. I think it is what my old boss Oscar would call like charismatic megafauna as leadership is impossible and is not what New York City needs, certainly. I think there needs to be many faces, many voices present in the way that we curate and who we're holding up. And to pretend like I have even a third of the answers, let alone all of them, and can speak on them is just false. And I can't do that. And I don't want to do that. I will take responsibility for the decisions that we do make, which I also think is important and something that I think is really critical in leadership that I have rarely seen, which is the ability to apologize and to just point out our own errors as we go along, which I would love to see more of. Truly, and not in a like open letter sort of way, but in just a daily practice sort of way. I think it's important to point out the things we don't know, and it can be really dangerous as a woman in leadership, as a woman of color in leadership, to do that. But I think I've really tried to hold on to that, to make sure that I'm pointing out what I don't know, what I do know, what everybody else knows, asking questions. You know, I have these sort of like, okay, it's time for Big Presenting 101 with Shanta, who's my teacher today, and I like that. You know, I find that actually very fulfilling. And I want other people to have that opportunity. And I have always sought out my mentors and told them, okay, you're my mentor now. You know, just so you know, I'm looking to you. I'm going to ask you questions. And I do that to other people too. For my, I'm looking for people to mentor. I'm absolutely, I feel like you have to be always at the center of your own community, of your personal community. The best artists I know do that, where they're constantly looking up and looking down and around and understanding where they can both be pulling people up to where they are and also be reaching for something that they don't quite know. And I think I have learned that from Toshi Regan, who is one of my great mentors, and I try to do that and that's actually also the artists that I am most interested in supporting are the artists that do that as well.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. So, Daisy, who I don't know if any of you know her, but she just started as the director of the gun gallery at Kenyon College. And so I was really excited to have her in this conversation because, as some of you may know, I am moving on from the Armory and starting a new position as artistic director of the Brown Arts Institute. And thank you. Daisy and I have been having ongoing conversations. She was a wonderful collaborator around the Astor Gates Black Artists Retreat. And we've been talking about what it means to be on a college campus now. And what does it mean to shepherd the careers, the creative energy of young people who may, like some of us, been going in a certain direction by our parents or other mentors, but then show them the power and the essential nature of the arts. And so as I'm making this transition, really thinking so much about the power of the kind of leadership that you both were talking about. What does it mean to start an institution for the arts in 2021, in the middle of a pandemic, the tail end of the pandemic, the middle, wherever we are? What does it mean to staff up? What does it mean to the mission? What does it mean to a university campus that has decided to shine a light on the arts and to say, we're going to give you resources, we're going to give you support, we're going to give you a moment to think differently? And it's really high pressure. It feels like a lot of pressure, but it's also very exciting. And so maybe one last thing before we open up, if anyone has any questions, what are you thinking about for the future? What the future, in any way you want to define that, tomorrow, later this afternoon, like the future. I think something that's been so powerful about Carrie's installation here is it has given space to all of us, and I hope all of you who've been in it, to actually just think a little differently, right? Just like, oh, I'm gonna think a little differently about my life, my mission, things that I'm thinking about for the future. So maybe just a few words on that front.
What am I thinking about for the future? That's a tough one, even though our job is to have visions, right, as leader. But I want to go back one second to your thinking about the academic space and what that means now, because I was also interested in hearing that from you and Daisy. I have a supposition, and it's probably going to be a bit provocative, but I really feel as though we're in a little bit of this kind of STEM backlash now that we've invested so much in the sciences, which I love, right, and believe in. We've invested so much in sort of the hard maths that we've forgotten to take care of people's souls. And I had a brilliant high school teacher, a literature teacher, who said that art is about the care of the soul. And if we cannot live in a world where we can add and we can, bubble things and make all sorts of lithium-powered, hydrogen-powered batteries, but we can't imagine the person who's going to be on the receiving end of that, we are, pardon my French, fucked. And so I do think that this kind of turn back to the arts and humanities is going to be really, or the reinvestment, at least in the college era, areas in the humanities and the arts, is part of that kind of also reinvestment in thinking through the soul. In terms of the future, I think the thing that I'm constantly imagining is how is this moment that we're in now, this kind of post-COVID reckoning moment where we're seeing the arrival and ascension of so many brilliant people of color into positions, especially positions of leadership. How do we think about this as not a blip, but really sustainable? And I bore my partner, hours and days on end with thinking about, how can the little things I do now, the uptick in shows by BIPOC artists, the inclusion of more Black artists into the collection, how can I make sure that someone coming behind me, no matter what color they are, is equally committed to that project? How do we begin to write this into the new DNA coding of the institution? And so that's really, for me, the task, to not imagine this as a kind of wave, but imagining this as the kind of catalytic moment of a newly kind of evolving institution. So that's what I'm really thinking about, because it also occurred to me through the pandemic that the work that I want to do is not about my tenure. But this is a decades-long, multi-tenure project that will have to continue past my time at the institution.
I would say, in terms of, academics, I went to a school where I only, again, in retrospect, realized that I had one woman teacher for my entire 4 years of going to school for theater. And I had one male person of color teacher in that entire 4 years as well. And I'm thrilled that I don't think that would be allowed to happen in any major university. I hope in no university ever again. Or that certainly somebody, including myself, would have noticed and said, wait a minute, what am I doing here? What could I possibly be learning about the human condition and how to express it from this very specific lens? So that's just the I think there's plenty to do and plenty that we did not do in the arts that we were offering in universities for years and years and years. So I can imagine why plenty of people did not feel welcome at every stage or interested in what we were creating. In terms of the future, I had so many brilliant things to say, I would totally forget all of them. I forget all of them. I do think, holding on to this moment, I do think that live arts, what I'm doing, really trying to articulate right now is the arts, the live arts, as a desegregationist practice. That this is the place where we are forced to be with people that do not look like us. We are forced to hear somebody else's story. I know there's a positive way of framing this, but I haven't really gotten there yet. But that matters. It matters to not just be with your neighbors, to not just be with your coworkers, to not just be with the people that go to your church. That this is where we bring strangers together to experience things together. And I think we have to make that a mandate in the way that it lives and breathes in so many other cultures. In this culture it is so separate and so outside of what somebody's everyday experience could be. And so how can we perhaps mandate? I have an idea of every Fortune 500 company making sure that every employee has to go to at least 6 cultural events every year. But I would love for it to feel like it is something that has to be a part of our lives, because it is part of what makes us better. This is how we practice. Even when you hate things, it matters to sit next to somebody that you don't know, and for a long time, not just on the train. So I think that's I don't know, the future question or thing that I think I'm going to be spending some energy on in the days, weeks, months, years to come.
Oh, thank you both for that. And for me, I think that I'm constantly navigating between the ephemeral and the permanent. And it's kind of cool that I'm sitting between the two of you, because it's like live arts and the visual art on, So as many of you may have heard earlier, we, as part of the 100 Years, 100 Women project, we commissioned Elizabeth Colomba to paint a portrait of a lady for the Armory. And to speak on behalf of myself as a staff member here and others who are here, you know, we walk in these doors every day and we see these men in military garb painted a certain way. We're in this room in which the young Tiffany and his friends, you can't see too well right now because it's very dark, but like collaborated together to create these incredible, this is an incredible room. But it doesn't necessarily represent who we are as we walk in that door as staff or as audience members. Some audience members walk in. So this idea of commissioning an amazing French painter from Martinique who has made her home in Harlem to paint a portrait of a lady for permanent installation at this Armory, and you can go and visit her. Her name's Minerva. She's amazing, golden figure of hope, just off the box office there. So for me, in an institution that does all kinds of artistic projects, to have a permanent kind of, you are welcome here. I keep calling her a beacon of what is to come, I hope. And so that kind of navigation between the ephemeral liveness of things that we want to do. We're all here present now, and we're all going to go off into our own lives, and that ephemeral nature of the performances you'll see later that will stick with you in your memory, and that permanent, what is on the wall that you can change. You can change. So maybe we'll stop there. Are there any questions? I think, we have a few more minutes, I think. 5 minutes, thank you, Andrew. Any questions from anyone? Yes.
I so appreciate the conversation. I just wanted to refer to this idea of ephemeral versus the permanent, because I think it's much more of a line of transcendence, and we're all kind of perverting that and trying to figure out what that means. And I guess my question is, in this time that's so fraught, where I feel that we who are at institutions are trying to define or, share a larger idea of what is quote-unquote American culture, or even classic. Because that narrative is what, and that's not that narrative just in New York City. I'm less worried about New York City. I'm worried about other parts of the country. And the idea of some of the right wing becoming a elite system, which is hard to, challenge that. So I'd be really curious to hear your thoughts about, I guess, one, from the standpoint of the work that you're doing, how do we get it outside of the building? How do we get those ideas outside of the building? And then I guess two is the idea that I think even with your comment about STEM, how do we change the belief system so it's not the arts or STEM? Innovation is one of the things. So anyway, that's sort of a convoluted question, but I really appreciate what you've been sharing, and I'd be really curious to hear a little bit more from all three of you about that.
Sorry, I feel like I always start first, Shanta. There's so much there. But I would say, so I'll take your question in two parts. One is, how do we think about the dissemination of the work that we're doing across the country, especially now, which, there's so many thoughts around that. And then secondly, how do we get rid of these either-or propositions? The dissemination question is a really interesting one, because one of the first things that I also realize is what I do is not for everyone, right? And I think it's really important for me to be very clear about the fact that what I do is one way of being, of entering into the arts. It's one kind of semi-academic mode of art history, and that not everyone's going to appreciate it. But what I've had to learn is a bit of humility and realize that this can also sit beside another conversation around culture. I think I'm less interested in so much the dissemination and more interested in how do you have productive conversations and even productive debates around what constitutes culture. I will also say that without me knowing it, I was probably raised to be a bit of a globalist. And so again, I am probably less interested in what happens inside the States as a primary site of these conversations. I'm really interested in those exchanges internationally now, especially because we are a nation, if we do not identify as indigenous, of imports from another place wherein all these cultural traditions began to morph and influence each other and end up in both conflict, but also in some kind of confluence. So I feel like that's a bit of an abstract way of answering it, but it is, for me, the reality. Like, we cannot think we are the only and the best thing. And I think that is one of the biggest lessons I'm trying to also offer my team now. They've been taught you are the end-all, do-all, and be-all, and that is not the case. There are plenty of other cultural traditions, even right here in New York, that have not been part of the conversation that need to be part of the conversation. And in terms of the either-or proposition, that is 100% about sort of educational systems in my mind. I was not raised with an either-or proposition. I had a focus, obviously, but I went to a Chicago public school on the south side of Chicago, and there were languages, music, visual arts, sports, all of that. You were doing that at 6, all the way up until you were 18 in public school my entire life. There should not be an either-or proposition, and I'm not in the field of education, but if I were to make some mandates, that would be it. You're doing it all. And then you need to be fluent in it all in some way, shape, or form to call yourself an adult.
Maybe one more quick question. Okay, it's hard to see. Yes.
This is like a super phone basic.
Which Shanta will answer.
I think all three of you have such epic roles right now. I can't even imagine what routine looks like. And you can't even get into those weeks. You have to stay up there always. And so my two questions are, you can pick either one. What artist, poet, author, showrunner, whomever is you're really oh yes, this is giving me some solace, or what is a ritual you're doing for yourself that's helping you stay grounded?
So many that are here, I think truly looking at this lineup of incredible artists, but Carrie, obviously one of the greats, Nona Hendricks, who is just a force of nature every minute of every day. I've been, Mahogany Brown, I have had the opportunity to meet, who was already our poet in residence at Lincoln Center when I showed up, and just, I think artists are always multidisciplinary, thinking on 70 different levels that, you can only, I was speaking for myself, I'm thinking on 2. And you meet an artist and the ideas are just so much bigger than the container that we are building. So I think, every day that I can find a way to be in a conversation with my team, but also with an artist, at least one or two artists that I love is really a more full day and a better day. And I think figuring out how to center artists in our society at large, but also within our work environments is really important for us in working in these institutions and figuring out how do we actually get these voices into not just the stage, but also into our marketing meetings and our development meetings is really critical. Self-care ritual. Oof. no idea. I do think a lot about rituals. I mean, I have two incredible members of the Lincoln Center team here, and we spend a lot of time. This whole summer is going to be about ritual for us. That's, off the record. But we're building, I think we have to build some new rituals. So, but I get up, I hang out with my kid, make a bunch of pancakes, and then get to work.
Pancakes are very important. Thank you for that question. You know me, I'm not going to answer a question, but I will answer it by saying that I think I'm most well when I'm in the company of great artists who are generous. And I think Carrie Mae Weems is the queen of generosity, as you can see from these few days. Like, really. And I'm also, I think for me, that self-care is about having conversations like this and having a camaraderie. I think things have changed across the pandemic, that we're not in opposition so much to each other anymore. We actually want to support each other. And I think very much the 100 Years, 100 Women project showed that we had 10 partners across the city. And we actually worked together to create something really special. And as the pandemic hit us and everyone was trying to survive, that project brought us hope, and the self-care that came with it was kind of extraordinary. This idea of commissioning 100 women artists in a moment where they had nothing. They couldn't even get to their studios, or they didn't have access to things. And then I have to say, Lincoln Center this summer said, we weren't your original partner, but can we partner with you now? Can you come and share? Our only live manifestation of that project was at Lincoln Center this summer. And that was us being, and many folks at Lincoln Center offering that, who may even be here. Just see, there she is. Jordana, just saying, we value that interconnectivity in a way that I just didn't ever really feel here in New York before. I feel like we all were kind of in our lanes and really trying to protect our institutions in the way that we needed to, but that's been breaking down, and I think that's a really good thing. So maybe we will stop there, as we know there's so much more to see, so please go out and see more things. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. We invite you to take your seats. We're about to start with Tina Kukielski. Please welcome Tina Kukielski. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Before I get started, two things. I should mention we're going to watch some video. So I have some remarks to make, but if you all want to position yourselves in front of one of the two screens, you're going to have a much better experience. So please note that. Two, I really just wanted to send my gratitude and appreciation to the extraordinary Carrie Mae Weems for inviting me here today on behalf of the organization I run, Art 21. Carrie came into our lives in season 5 of the TV program we make called Art in the 21st Century. Very appropriately, the title of the episode that Carrie was included in was called Compassion, which I see a lot of as I walk through the halls here, and as a reminder, I think, of a foundation in her work. We've made 6 films with Carrie over the course of the last, I would say, 10 or so years, the most recent documenting a performance she did called Grace Notes. You can see all of that on our website. Carrie has evolved to become a quite esteemed member of our board. We're really, really appreciative of the contributions that Carrie makes in that capacity. My name is Tina Kukielski. I'm the Susan Sollins Executive Director and Chief Curator of Art 21. And today I want to talk to you about what it means to listen to artists. And what I mean by that is to not just consume their work, but to really listen to what it is that the work is telling you and what the artist has to say about it. Many of us, I believe, have spent the last 20 months in something that might be called a passive position, one of consumer locked at home, trapped by the limitations brought about with the pandemic. And with the holiday season upon us, I'm feeling like that's even more true than ever before. So I'd like to invite you to suspend that for a moment. I'd like you to come actively listen with me. I am here to present a group of artists that we've been working with on educational resources about contemporary art, specifically our award-winning documentary films. We work with a lot of artists at Art 21, and our aim is always the same, to tell their story in their own words in the form of direct address. So I chose today 6 artists: Abigail DeVille, Camila Janan Rashid, Firle Baez, Wangechi Mutu, Guadalupe Maravilla, and Guan Zhao, because I believe that they have something to say about the world in which we live now. I believe they have something to say about how we see art, why it matters, art's purpose, both personal and political. I personally find their stories inspirational. Some of them are a bit unconventional, but most of all, I find them emotionally moving, and I hope you will too. If we take a moment and we read between the lines in watching these films, we will notice that the purpose of art, distinct from its value as a commodity, is continually being retooled and reshaped. And right now, artists are opening up pathways to help us heal in the ways that I believe our culture needs to heal to move forward. So my proposal today is this. It's simple. Let's listen. And trust me, I think it'll be worth it. Many of you know us, but for those of you that don't, Art 21 is a nonprofit educational organization and an independent producer of documentary films about artists. We distribute our films for free online, on PBS, and in classrooms worldwide. While the pandemic changed the very nature of our work, it simultaneously reinforced its value. Today, we find ourselves at the forefront of an unprecedented moment of remote learning that is changing the future of education. We are simultaneously amid a great cultural shift and reawakening, spurred by widespread diversity, equity, inclusion, and access conversations. Coming off of these 2 significant paradigm shifts has only reinforced what I believe we do best. This year, our viewership hit 2.5 million, well above attendance figures at today's major museums. I believe this way of learning, while actively listening and openly questioning, is the future of arts education. Today, I'm sharing with you clips of 6 artists whose stories we told in 2021. These are all brand new films. I want you to note, though, that they're not complete films. They're highlights and special moments of discovery and uncovery selectively chosen for today's presentation. I do encourage you all to watch the full films, available 24/7 at art21.org. One of the things that I like best about documentary is that it's based in the real world. We don't need to fake it. So for that reason, you'll see in our films themes resonant today: protest, pandemic, war, climate, immigration, childhood, representation, monumentality, and loss. As the last years of the culture wars have shown us, culture is highly subjective and open to interpretation. If one thing is true, it's that we're all dealing with some uncomfortable reckoning between assumptions and truth, reality and what we imagine it to be. Some artists make work from this place of misalignment. So you're going to see contradictions at play in many of these artists' stories, and we embrace that. One of the things that I like most about artists is that they are not afraid to deal with, face, and confront that contradiction. Some examples. Idealization and denigration can and do coexist. The rights and wrongs of process inform the finished thing. The seen and the unseen dance in tandem. Desirability and the abject share space on the page or canvas. At once, the comprehensiveness and fragmentation of language are equally possible. One of the reasons we follow artists is to learn more about what art can do, what it's for, why it has meaning, what is its purpose. Personally, I believe that artists hold the solutions to tomorrow's problems, and if we can agree on one thing, it's that everyone knows we need solutions. So with that in mind, I invite you, let's listen. Here, first off, is artist Abigail DeVille as she talks about so-called progress.
If there is no struggle, there is no progress. Those who profess to favor freedom and yet appreciate agitation are men who want crops without plowing up the ground. They want rain without thunder and lightning. They want the ocean without the awful roar of its many waters. Frederick Douglass, August 4th, 1857. Initially, I found the Frederick Douglass quote, and that was just me thinking about a way to quickly contextualize what happened this summer. I think it was the images that he painted, and I just kept thinking about the rolling waves and just the waves of people that hooked each other arm in arm and protested in the face of potentially death, right, through this pandemic, to fight for whatever this nation actually pretends that it was, founded or based on. It's a commemoration of the Black Lives Matter protests and movement and the Black lives here in this continent for 400 years.
Next is artist Camila Janan Rashid on the subject of legibility.
This one's done?
I think so. But what does done mean?
This one's text has this illusion of comprehensiveness. Even if you've read something once, it doesn't mean that you understand it. So I sort of like to play with language. I'm making something either very, very legible or making something very, very opaque. Encouraging people to do the work of understanding it. It's really an invitation. Come think with me.
Here is artist Khary Lazzare-White, a Dominican American living in New York City, on transforming something abject into something desirable.
One of the first reasons I wanted to work on these paintings was looking at some of the first scientific illustration of flora and fauna from the New World, looking at Carl Linnaeus. Here's this guy who was the foundation of modern scientific methods of observation and categorization. But so much of his work was sheer nonsense. It equated the New World black and brown body with bestiality. In telling of what the New World people were, you'd be next to cannibals and vampires. So, leaning into their already fallible vision and making something new. In reading my paintings of Siguapas, I'm asking the viewer to come to terms with their own feelings around a woman's body. The Siguapa is this trickster figure. She's a seductress. Someone will be lured by her and then be completely lost and never seen again. The description is so ambiguous. It could be anything from like a mongoose to the most beautiful woman to the most ugly woman. The only certain thing is that her legs are backwards. If you followed their footsteps, you were going in the wrong direction. And that she has this lustrous mane of hair. She was meant to be something that made us so fearful that we could be quiet for long enough to be groomed into civility. The normative tone of the story is these are wanton female creatures, they're hypersexual and they derail culture. And the understory is they're highly independent, they're self-possessed, and they feel deeply. So who would want to be that? What was exciting in using that image was to be able to incorporate all those things that were labeled abject, that were seen as unwanted, and reframe them as something beautiful and with an eye of desire.
Next is Wanguchi Mutu, an artist based between New York and Nairobi, speaking on feminisms and memory. She asks, why worship the image but denigrate the human?
My earliest childhood memories are in this one particular area that we lived in called Woodley. Lived in a little bungalow. So you have one floor, have a garden around. I remember playing in the garden. I remember the dry grass. We did a lot of playing with our toys in sections of the garden that we weren't supposed to. We got very dirty in the garden. It was a bit of a wild space. Those memories have made an impact on how I work. I went to a Catholic school and we were all girls. I was surrounded by women teachers, women students, the Virgin Mary, all kinds of feminine energy. And because I think of it as such a massively universal part of humanity, I'm able to keep pulling from it. It's an eternal source of inspiration for me. The way we worship the image of the woman but denigrate the actual human being of woman. That schism bothers me, and it's obviously something that has plagued us for a long, long time. So that's what I'm looking for. The sentinels are sort of this regal figure who is standing representing a female, divine feminine form. I want to make sure that she is absolutely stable, that she's able to stand. I realized they looked like these soldiers, like they were guarding me or us, guarding language, guarding the earth that they're made from. So I call them sentinels.
Here's Guadalupe Maravilla, an artist from El Salvador living in the United States, discussing the role of play in his own childhood journey across the US-Mexico border.
I was born in El Salvador. In San Salvador, there was a revolution that was starting when I was born. My first few years, it was kind of a happy time. And then the war started to escalate. My family had to flee El Salvador immediately, and then I was kind of by myself. When I was 8 years old, they told me I was going to be reunited with my family in the United States, but I'm going by land. Plant them anywhere randomly. So my journey started in El Salvador, then I went to Honduras, to Guatemala, and all the way through Mexico. And this kind of went on for almost 2.5 months. Tripa Chica is a game that I grew up playing with other friends on a piece of paper. I used to play when I was crossing the border when I was 8 years old. I used to play with the coyote, I used to play with other kids. So this has always been a really important game. And this is why I always mark my spaces with this game. I was very lucky because the border was very different in those times. It was 1984, but even those kids that I was with, some of them didn't make it. I still think about that. Could have went so many different ways.
And finally, Guan Zhao, a Chinese artist living in Beijing with a surprising position on politics and art.
大的时代背景，每个人都逃不开的。尤其是在中国，大家对于政治和社会性的作品尤其感兴趣。人们喜欢去讨论政治，或者说人们喜欢去看到有社会性的作品。他们会觉得那样的作品好像似乎是更深刻的。但是其实大家忘记，那种作品只是很多艺术作品当中其中的一个类型。我说的不是西方的画廊，也不是一个欧洲或者美国的艺术家，而是讲本土艺术家和本土画廊，包括本土藏家。我觉得上一代的艺术家是很难在一开始就说我不想去做 political 的作品，我也不想去做社会现实的作品，我只是想就怎么讲，我只是想安安静静的做一个艺术家。但是上一代的艺术家是很难做这种类型的作品，并且能够赚到钱。所以我觉得基本上像我80年代生的艺术家开始有了这个可能性，就是OK， 你可以去做一个视觉艺术家，你也可以就是生活下去。我觉得这是我觉得非常好的一点。 所以我还是挺希望中国就是不同的艺术、不同的类型能够再多一点。任何一个艺术家所做的一切事情都是为了表达自由，都是为了把我们的 idea 从现有的 frame 里面释放出来。这其实都是政治的，这是真正的古典政治的。
Thank you. To close, I just want to acknowledge this work is done by an incredible team, including the whole staff of Art 21, our board, as well as a team of producers, directors, editors that worked with us on these 6 films across Beijing, Nairobi, and New York. So thank you.